Hello, I am Kees Smith from the United Nations in Trinidad and Tobago. Today I am joined by Mr. Kees Rade of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in The Hague. We are at the Caribbean Sustainable Development Forum. And Mr. Rade, I just asked firstly if you can share with us some of the takeaways from the sessions that have been held this morning and yesterday.
Takeaways. Well, first of all, it's interesting to see very different experiences of all the. We mainly talk about the SIDS, of course, who are meeting here from the Caribbean, but also some experience from SIDS from other parts of the world. And well, it's obviously that all these SIDS have very specific problems. We'll take the Caribbean. The fact that most SIDS are pretty small in size makes it a challenge to develop sustainable policies. Most of them are very dependent on one sector, for example, which is tourism. Yeah. They have major problems in terms of energy because it's difficult to develop renewable energy. Yeah. And of course, they're very heavily dependent on fossil fuels, on diesel and so on, which is very expensive to bring to these small countries. So what struck me is that really it's a very specific kind of problem, yeah. And that perhaps in the international community we should recognize more the fact that perhaps for these kind of special problems we need special solutions.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your presentation yesterday that The Hague, you measure the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. How have you been doing this, and what are some of the results you found thus far?
Well, I think that's one of the most interesting outcomes of the SDG discussion. That before that we had the Millennium Development Goals that were exclusively applied for developing countries. But the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are for everybody, including ourselves. And it was a bit of a shock to certain of our line ministries when, after the adoption of the SDGs, we as Ministry of Foreign Affairs approached them and told them, well, hey guys, these targets are not only for developing countries, but also for us. And we have to take them seriously. We signed for them. So what we have asked then is our National Statistical Office to basically go through all the indicators that are, let's say, hanging under these 17 SDGs and to see, well, how do we score as Netherlands? And it was quite interesting to see that in many sectors we are on the right track to achieve the SDGs by 2030. But in certain areas, it's definitely also for us quite a challenge to achieve the SDGs. And for example, on the gender SDGs, I think there is definitely one of the issues where we have to make progress. Another one is sustainable consumption and production patterns, where also perhaps we should still make some progress. Yeah. And this report was widely distributed in the Netherlands. It was discussed. It was discussed by all partners, so by the private sector, the public sector, knowledge institutions. And what we're trying now is many coalitions were formed to support the implementation of the SDGs in the Netherlands. And it's interesting to see that it's really something that is very much on the mind of people, and there's a great public interest for it.
Thank you. And the Dutch Green Growth Strategy, this sort of describes how you will implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Can you share a bit about what that is?
Well, that's a government-wide policy that we adopted, which has 8 pillars. You're talking about mobility, you're talking about sustainable cities, you're talking about food production. And I guess the two most important ones are, one is energy, where we can see that we really want to increase the percentage of renewable energy in our energy mix. So far we are not having a terribly positive score in that respect, but we want to move from, let's say, 5% at present to 16% in 2023, which in a couple of years is more than a tripling of the renewable energy part, which will be quite a challenge, but we think we're on our way, mainly by using offshore wind energy, which is something that fits us very well because of our geographical situation. And the other important pillar, I guess, is circular economy, which is something that is very actively pursued in the whole of Europe, I should say, but also certainly in the Netherlands, where we have adopted all kinds of measures to encourage the private sector and also consumers, for that matter, to be much more aware of the need to reuse raw materials. and we want to diminish our utilization of external raw materials by 50% in 2030. So really we're seeing a transition to a totally different way of production and consumption.
Thank you. And just before you go, what do you think are some of the next steps that are needed following a forum like this one to help advance the Sustainable Development Goals in OCTs, for example?
Yeah. Well, what's very interesting is that we're involved in all these working groups, and all these working groups, I think we have 10 working groups discussing different parts of the equation, and the intention is to gather all the action points that are being formulated in each working group, and tomorrow that will be put together in some kind of an action program. So I'm very curious to see what will come out of it. But I think you can already see now that while there are a few issues, renewable energy is a very important one, diversification in terms of not being dependent only on tourism, but also within the tourism sector, diversification to encourage more ecotourism and so on. And of course the issue that is always hanging above the market, which is finances. How can we find the funds, public funds, donor money, but certainly also the private sector funding, which is a challenge, especially if you have small economies. And I think these will probably be the main items of this action plan that will be adopted tomorrow. And of course, it's one thing to formulate a plan, but the second thing is to implement it. And that's something that we will all have to monitor in the years to come.
Okay, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for joining us.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. For more information on the CSDF, visit their Facebook page at Caribbean Sustainable Development Forum. For more information on the work of the United Nations and sustainable development in the Caribbean region, visit www.2030caribbean.org.